let's start with ArcelorMittal South Africa. Okay, I think everybody knows this company. It was founded back in the day in the late 20s, and it was called Iscor. It was a state-owned corporation. It was listed and spun off into the market in the 80s. I remember my parents getting shares for R2 each. It was one of those things by way of popular subscription. Went through a couple of iterations. Remember, they spun off the iron ore mines. Those ended up in Kumba and are now elsewhere, and we're not talking about those. We're talking about the steel producer. It was acquired by ArcelorMittal, which was the global corporation built by the Mittal family. I don't know, Wayne, when was that the Mittals kind of got involved?
One of the interesting things is you can't even remember how they got hold of the company, because they took out a management contract and then they were rewarded based on performance criteria in shares, and then all of a sudden they owned the company.
And then they got waivers in order to take their stake higher and higher, and they got about a 65% stake. Yes. And of course, the Mittals were a major consolidator. But as far as ArcelorMittal South Africa is concerned, at one point it had a market cap, I don't even know where it was, but well into the 20 or 30 billion. Its market capitalization now, sadly, is 4.4 billion rand. It's not making profits currently. It has no price-to-earnings ratio, not paying dividends. So it's a shadow of its former self. Let's look at that 5-year chart, because that tells the story. I mean, there you go, from close to 100 rand a share to well around the sort of 7 mark. And the news, if it helps, is that the global ArcelorMittal share price looks the same.
Yeah,
it's also gone from 100 to 7.
I mean, this share is down not just that 100 rand, I think it's down from 250 in 2008.
You're right.
So this has been destroyed by a factor, like you cannot believe. And at the end of the day, there are some pluses and negatives. The pluses are, there's no one else really making steel. But the negatives are, somehow China can export steel to South Africa, landed in the port, cheaper than what Arcelor can make it. And that's one of the major problems.
So let's talk about the global steel market dynamics. So we know that in Europe and the US, there's somewhat of a shutdown. There were many new steel mills built in China. Yes. That's why they needed all the iron ore. As you say, they've now become global exporters. Container load, you can buy it on Alibaba.
Yeah.
The local guys had a production in Vanderbijl, in Newcastle, in Thaba-Zimbi, and in Saldanha.
Yeah, and Saldanha.
Okay, so now, as far as we know, they've shut down Thaba-Zimbi. They had a furnace fire blowout in Newcastle, but that's upland. Vereniging Vanderbijl, I'm talking about, is one complex. That's apparently now going to be shut down.
That's under scrutiny.
Yeah,
that's
and then I assume Saldanha is still up and
running. Will still go, but I mean, the Vanderbijl, they issued a notice very recently on Vanderbijl and Vereniging saying, listen, guys, we're terribly sorry, but we're going to have to essentially mothball it. We're going to have to just look at our future, keep it, on care and maintenance, but close down major parts of the business.
Because we know that they had the supply arrangement with Kumba, and they fell out over that, and there was a bit of drama where they were getting very cheap iron ore, and then that kind of fell away, and then they forgot to renew the mineral rights, and that whole debacle.
That was a complete disaster. They got iron ore at, I think, cost plus type of arrangement, and that was the deal set in place when Kumba was spun out and Anglo's bought it.
But they still have a preferential arrangement of some sort. But what we are saying about this company is that the demand for steel in South Africa has been, I don't know, is it mixed? Is it terrible?
Terrible.
But they're building Medupi and all these other things. Surely they must use a lot of steel there.
But I mean, at the end of the day, that doesn't really make a huge difference per se. I mean, steel is manufacturing, steel is mining. The manufacturing industry is decimated. Mining is in deep trouble.
Yeah,
and they got the cheap imports coming in, and there is just there's no growth in companies that use steel as one of their primary inputs. In fact, there's only reduction. And to couple with that, all the electricity problems, because they're heavy users of electricity. So this is an industry in serious turmoil, very difficult times.
They're looking for some sort of support from the South African government, because there was talk that maybe the South African government was going to get involved in the steel business, or it was going to change the tariff formulas.
They're going to change the tariff. What they've done now, which I think is a virtual certainty, is they're going to slap a 10% tariff on this dumped or cheap or dumped Chinese steel, whatever you want to call it. And you saw a brief rise in the share price, in Arcelor share price over that. But of course, the government realizes steel is a strategic industry. And as you said, a couple of years ago, they wanted to open up their own steel mill. Thank goodness they didn't, because that would have been little bit of a waste of money.
Because we know Evraz, which is the old Highveld, is basically on
rescue.
its knees.
Yeah,
and then there's Iscor, which ended up, I'm not quite sure where.
Well, Iscor was sold out from Anglo American, but I'm not too sure who bought them in. But Iscor's not a raw steel.
It's more recycle.
They make things. They're a foundry. They did a lot of heavy engineering work. They didn't make steel. They didn't, smelt iron ore and make steel like Arcelor. So they're a little bit more downstream than Arcelor. But I mean, as you said, Evraz Highveld. I mean, when that was still, I can remember going back many years. That was one of the biggest industrial complexes in the country when it was still owned by the old Anglo-American Industrial Corporation, AMIC. And then Evraz came in and bought it, and I wouldn't say it doesn't exist now because I drove past it the other day, but it's a shadow of its former self and it's under business rescue.
Yeah, let's talk quickly about ArcelorMittal, and I'm sticking with this one because it's the largest and also one that we know quite a lot of investors have a historic relationship with. Management. So when the Mittals took control of it, Aditya Mittal, the son of Lakshmi, was kind of the boss for a while, and then they would parachute in guys from the other operations that ArcelorMittal had around the world, some very good guys. Recently, though, the Paulo Flaherty is the CEO. So he's the guy who was the ex-finance director at Iscor, right? So he's probably a pretty solid guy, and he's the one now who's trying to work out what to do with the cost structure.
But look, the problem is just the price of steel is too low globally that you actually, look, one of the major negatives of Iscor, to make steel profitably, you have got to put out steel in massive quantities to get your unit cost down. And Arcelor, the South African operation, is small. It's very difficult for them to be, no matter how hard they try or how efficient they may be, they just simply have not got the volume to truly compete globally.
So really, I mean, what kind of person is going to be buying the shares? Who owns them now? Some of the deep value kind of out of favor?
I would say some of the very, very deep value, just about to, go out of deep value investors own these things. But look, cycles are cycles. It's not the first time the industry has faced this. It faces this challenge once every 10 or 15 years. It's actually quite a regular occurrence. And truly savvy investors, now a savvy investor is a person who only answers to themselves over time, or their clients really know them and trust them. If you take a 5 or 10 year view, you're probably buying this thing at the absolute cheapest price you can. But for the general person, you can't afford the pain to wait for so long.
And the pain that perhaps, you buy them at 7 or 8 rands a share,
and they go to
3 or 4 before they eventually wake up. Okay, so we're going with not hot, I would say.
Not hot,
Excellent, right, there we go. So ArcelorMittal, bit of a long and arduous story, not doing too marvelously.